Hello there ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a brand new video on Scum. Today I'm going to be walking you through the server settings for single player / multiplayer. Before we begin, speaking directly to anyone who is an administrator of a multiplayer server, please make sure that you are set as an admin for your own server. If you are part of GG Host, all you have to do is go to your configuration files and you can find this file right here, the adminusers.ini file. Add your ID64 to this file, click save and log back into the game and you will now be able to access the server settings. If you are wondering about single player, you do not have to do this, for you are already an administrator. You've already got administrative privileges because you are running a local server. So, let's begin. How do we access the server settings within the game? Press escape and click on server settings. If you're a multiplayer admin, you should see this now. If you're in single player, you should see this by default. Click it. General settings apply to both users that use your server for their fun, and they also apply a few interesting things that will help you as an administrator to essentially manage your server. So going down the list, allow first person on or off. Do you want them to be able to use first person? The next one, allow third person. Do you want them to be able to use third person? Now if you want a first person only, toggle third person off and first person on. If you want a third person only, toggle this off and toggle this on. Alright, allow crosshair. This is the white dot that you'll see in the middle of your screen when you go to draw your bow or when you go to look at something. You'll essentially have a crosshair to dictate where the middle of the screen is. You can turn this on or you can turn this off. Allow the map screen. This is the map overlay when you press M for mic. This allows you to see the map screen and where you are exactly on the map via the red dot. If you want to set this on or off, do so at your own discretion. Allow mines and traps. Enables the use of mines and traps within the game. Now, please pay attention to the asterisk because this is going to be important for multiplayer servers. Requires a server restart for the change to be applied. For single player, all you have to do is click escape and go back to the main menu, click continue and you've relaunched your local server. For multiplayer servers, all you have to do is go back to your essential management dashboard, turn off your server, turn it back on and the settings will be applied. Allow skill gain in safe zones. Safe zones are currently dictated by the 4 green zones darted around the map, which are essentially the traders. Do you want players the ability to have those safe zones as a way to skill up essentially? If you're running a PvE server, you want this on. If you're running a PvP server, you might want this off. It's totally up to yourself. Limit global chat. Is global chat limited to admins and developers only, or is it accessible to everyone? What this is basically saying is, do you want global chat turned on or do you want it turned off? Rusty locks logging. This is for multiplayer server admins. This logs the lockpicking events around the map. Now, rusty locks are the ones that you can find on police department locked containers, as well as the ones in POIs like the naval dockyard, as well as abandoned bunkers and normal bunkers. So this is for them. This is not so much for single player guys or anyone who wants to enjoy single player. If you want to manage who's lockpicking where or who's doing is fast, then this is something you might want to pay attention to. Disable examine ghost. Now this is only applicable to the Halloween event and I think the Christmas event. The Halloween event has a ghost that will appear and give you a fright. Same with the winter update, which usually has a puppet dressed as Santa. This is the same ghost, just reskinned, or different clothes. Do you want this turned on or do you want this turned off? This by default for me is off. If you want to turn this on, that's perfectly up to you. As a server admin, do you want to scare your player base? You know, you want to scare them or do you not want to scare them? It's totally up to yourself. Disable timed gifts. Timed gifts is in relation to the Christmas Day event, which is essentially the 25th of December, where you have a Christmas tree within your base and you have gifts that will just randomly appear underneath your tree. Do you want this on or do you want this off? Again, totally up to yourself. Disable base building. Do you want a base building server, or do you want it to be so that players have to roam around the map and use the prefab buildings that are currently darted around the map as is? Okay, so disable base building by default should be off because you want people to build. But if you don't want people to build, toggle this on. Partial wipe. Now, let me explain this. For single player, you don't really have to worry about this. For multiplayer server admins, if you want to do a partial wipe, now before we begin this actually, let's describe what a partial wipe actually is. Partial wipe is a map wipe. It does not wipe your character skills and it does not wipe your character gold. However, it will wipe your banked money, as well as any bases that you might have, any items that you might have on your character, or any bases or containers that you may have built along the way. This partial wipe keeps your character, but refreshes the map. When you toggle this on, what will happen is, as a multiplayer server admin, all you have to do is click stop and start and it will do a partial wipe. I think the same can also be done with a restart, a simple restart. So when people log back into the game, they will be in their default orange prisoner garbs and everyone will be essentially be reset back to 0 in terms of items, but they will retain their skills and their gold. Gold wipe, this is quite self-explanatory. If you want to turn this on and restart your server, it will wipe everyone's gold. Everyone's gold. Fame gain multiplier. How much fame do your players gain? Usually by default this is 1, for me it's 3 because I like to have high fame. Fame penalty point on death, 0.1 is for me because I don't want to lose that many fame points, but you can set this to as many as you want. Fame penalty on being killed by another player. You can set the difference between being killed by a puppet or animal versus a player. Now, for the player that kills you, they will be rewarded on kill X amount or X percentage of fame points from that person that they've killed. You can set this as you will. Log suicides, again this is for multiplayer server admins. You want to see who's essentially committing not alive on the map, or do you not? It doesn't really matter. Enable spawn on the ground. This is for people who don't want a server where you spawn in the parachute. A lot of people don't particularly like the way that the parachutes operate. They would prefer it the old way, where your character would just suddenly materialise on the ground in a random location. This is exactly what that is. If you want them to spawn in parachutes, have it off. If you want them to not be spawning in parachutes, turn this on. Log chest ownership. Again, this is for multiplayer server admins. When a chest is created, it will create an event in a log file where a person's ID 64 will be registered with that container that's been built. So if you want to log who is building what, or who's building what chest, this is something that you can essentially govern or manage. Next, we're going to go to the world tab. Now, by default, you will land on bunkers. Bunkers is related to the abandoned bunkers, not the live bunkers, not the ones that are patrolled by sentries. We're talking about the ones that hold all of the razors, as well as Mr. Brenner. Now, let's just go over these settings briefly, because I myself am still learning the kind of soft spot, or that magic zone where it's good, but it's also kind of challenging at the same time. Abandoned bunker commotion threshold. This is, I believe, set to 1 by default. So if you go in and start running around, you're causing a standard amount of commotion. If you go in and run around and it's 0.5, you're causing half the commotion that you would normally do sprinting around, making noise and stuff like that. this is all related to the commotion when it comes to the enemy activation, which is in relation to the razors. Alright? For multiplayer servers, abandoned bunker commotion per player extra threshold. So if one person goes in, they're causing the standard amount, the default amount, which is set here. If you have a buddy with you, or if you have 2 buddies with you, or 3 buddies with you, this is the extra threshold that will be applied. So if you have one person causing 1, and one person causing 1 as well, this will be 2. So there'll be double the amount of commotion. Next is the enemy bunker activation threshold. This is essentially the razors when you hear the babies crying and them running around the vents. So set this threshold in relation to your first setting and second setting here. Have it kind of like in a little sweet spot. You'll need to tweak it. You will need to tweak it. I can't tell you what the sweet spot is because I myself am still learning this sweet spot myself. Abandoned bunker enemy activation per player extra threshold. How many more razors are going to be activated with more players inside the bunker? So set this in relation to this setting in relation to this setting. Okay. Reset armory lockers only on abandoned bunker activation. Whether the reset armory lockers loot only when abandoned bunker is activated. So essentially, in the evening time, when this bunker is activated, will the armory reset if someone else goes into this abandoned bunker? Okay. NPCs I'm going to cover in a completely different video because as you can quite clearly see, there is a lot of settings here. There is a stupid amount of settings here. However, I will go over the sentries. I will not go over the NPCs as puppets essentially, because there is a lot of settings here to go over. So I'll make that in a completely separate video. I'll tie it into this video, so just stay tuned for that. However, let's go down here. So let's start with the dropship and the puppet encounters in the world. Encounter global zone cooldown multiplier. So zone cooldown multiplier for all players. This is the encounter. This is essentially lots of puppets spawning in the overworld in front of you or beside you or around you. So this is the cooldown multiplier between each event, each encounter that you'll experience. One is the default, so you'll only experience it every time you kind of sprint or every time you kind of show up at a POI. Puppet world encounter spawn weight multiplier. So set random open world puppet spawn weight, modify spawn chance. Okay, so what this is basically saying is how many more puppets are going to appear in open world events, open world encounters. So essentially running through a field or running through a forest, how many are going to encounter, how many more are you going to encounter? Animal world encounters spawn weight multiplier. So do you want to encounter more animals or do you want to encounter less animals like goats, boars, wolves, bears, that kind of thing? I've set it to 1 because that is the default, so I've not changed that, but you can change that if you want a server that's got a little bit more animals added to it. Dropship world encounter spawn weight multiplier. I've set this to 0 for obvious reasons, because single player dropships are a wee bit of a menace, but in multiplayer you might want to set this to 1 as default, or you might want to set it to 2 so there's more chance of a dropship being encountered by players. Enable dropship abandoned bunker encounter. So essentially, when you enter an abandoned bunker and you exit it, if you're successful in getting out of it, it will trigger a sentry to be dropped on you. Dropship abandoned bunker encounter trigger chance. So this is essentially minus 1.0 is the default, so chance for dropship encounter to trigger upon alarm activation. So minus 1 is if you trigger it once, it's going to show up. Okay. Base building encounter trigger chance. So this is if you have a base on the map. This is probably in relation to my single player save where a dropship just randomly appeared and dropped a sentry right on my doorstep and started destroying my base. So for multiplayer servers, you might want to set this up. For single player servers, or for single player players, you might want to set this to 0 because you don't want that chance to happen. Base building encounter trigger time multiplier. Base building encounter initial trigger and cooldown time. So this sets obviously how long between each encounter it's going to be. So if you've got a base and it's already set to like maybe 150 base elements, the base encounter will trigger because it's basically registered there's 150 elements on this base. Deploy a sentry. You want it to be a longer, you want essentially the trigger time to be lengthened or shortened. That's what this is basically saying. Enable dropship base building encounter. Now you can turn this off, and this is exactly what I've done. However, for multiplayer servers, you want to take this, you might want to set this to on, depending on how your players feel about it. Spawn encounters and threat zones ignoring base building. Spawn encounter and threat zones. Threat zones are related to POIs. High threat zones are, for example, military POIs and stuff like that. So I've got this turned on. Enable encounter manager low player count mode. Should enable low player count mode, increase threat zone radii, increase zombie count per encounter, instant high threat zone activation, warning huge performance hit on multiplayer servers. I'm not gonna lie, that's the first time I've seen that setting, and fair enough, the little trigger pot, the little kind of prompt doesn't really tell me much. But if you enable this, essentially it's going to increase it's essentially going to have it so if you have a server that has got low population or a low player count, like maybe 10, 12 or something like that, maybe you've got a 64 slot server and it's below 25%, this will still spawn the dropships to the encounters essentially. You can turn this on or off. However, for single player, I would leave it off. For multiplayer, I'd probably leave it on, depending on how your players feel about it. Right. Scrolling down. So, we did ignoring base building, player count mode, base building encounter, min number of elements to start. Right, so this is where, if you have the base building encounter turned on, this setting right here, if you have this turned on, this is the amount of elements before it shows up, right? Or the amount of elements after it shows up or before, I can't remember. Basically, if you've got 100 elements, it will spawn one. There's a chance of spawning it. This is the min number of it. So a minimum of 100 elements. So if you want just a simple little base with like maybe a 2x2 or something like that with 2 levels on it, that's not 100 elements. That's maybe less than like 40, maybe less than 30 elements or something like that. So shouldn't worry about that. This is mostly for multiplayer servers that have got big bases, like large exterior walls, big bases with like anti-raid kind of protection on them, like big areas where they can kind of like create towers and things like that. This is for them. Base building encounter min number elements to end. So essentially when the sentry and the dropship start attacking your base, as soon as it meets a threshold of 75 elements, so if you lose 25 elements from your base and it cuts it down to 75, it ends it. That's it done. That's it all over. Okay. Max allowed drones. These are essentially the drones that you will see in the world. The little white drones, not the gold drones. Those are admins, okay? So these are the little white drones. If you don't want those drones spawning in the world, set it to 0. If you want maybe 40 drones in the world, set it to 40, but I've set it to 0 because I don't like them. I personally don't like them. Disable sentry spawning. Do you want sentries in your server, or do you not want sentries in your server? If you don't want sentries in your server, toggle this on. If you do, leave it off, okay? Enable POI sentry respawning. So enable POI sentry respawning via dropships. So if you kill a sentry, if you disable a sentry, if you kill it, a new one will take its place. Okay? And it will show up via dropship, and you'll hear it and you'll see it. If you want to turn that off, turn it off. If you want to leave it on by default, leave it on. Disable suicide puppet spawning. This is quite self-explanatory. The suicide puppet in the game, which blows up, the beepers that we have, the hee-hees. If you want to turn them off, you can turn them off, or you can turn them on. Disable suicide puppet spawning by default should be off. That means they are turned on. If you turn this to on, it means they are turned off. Okay? Scrolling down. Puppets can open doors. Again, self-explanatory. Can they open the doors? Can they beat down the doors? Or can they not beat down the doors? Again, totally up to yourself. Puppets can vault through walls, or through walls. They sometimes do vault through walls, I'm going to be real with you. Puppets can vault through windows. These are the open windows which we can vault through and climb through. Can they also do that as well? You can set this on, or you can set it off. These are the fun ones. Puppet health multiplier. One's default, but you can set this to whatever setting you want. You can set that to 100 if you really wanted to. Dropship health multiplier. Again, one is the default. I would just leave it as the default. Sentry health multiplier, I would leave it as 1 as well. Base building attacker sentry health multiplier. So this is essentially when you have a base encounter, the sentry that is there to destroy your base, what is its health going to be? Again, I would leave it as 1. This is mostly for multiplayer servers, by the way. Okay, moving on from NPC, let's get into the weather. This is quite straightforward, I'm going to be honest with you. Start time of day, I set mine to 5:30 AM. You can set this to any time you want. Time of day speed I've set to 4. You can set this lower to make it longer, or higher to make it faster. Nighttime darkness. 0 is the default, so you can kind of see, but it's still dark. You can set this to 1, so it's really dark, or you can set it to -1, where it's not that dark. I believe that is what the setting is. The lower it is, the brighter it gets. Yeah, so -1 is where you can kind of see in the dark. 1 is where it's pitch black. 0 is the kind of like the sweet spot. These are your sunrise and sunset times. Set these as you will. Again, notice the asterisk, which means you need to stop your server and restart it, and then these settings will be applied. Next we have the map. Enable locked loot containers. These are the locked loot containers scattered in police departments, the POIs in bunkers and abandoned bunkers. Do you want them turned on, or do you want them turned off, or essentially locked versus unlocked? If you want them locked, leave this on. If you want them unlocked, turn it off. Custom map enabled. This is for people who want to maybe run a smaller map, or want to make a more focused server, maybe in the Samobor city, maybe they want it in the Zulu sectors, maybe they want people to live around the radiation zone, like a kind of stalker themed server or something like that. You can also set the custom map center X coordinate and Y coordinates. You can also set the width of it and the height. Garage door lockability. Let me explain what this is. There are garages in every town. There are garages in all the cities, and there's also some garages in selected POIs. Do you want players to have the ability to lock those garage doors, those sliding doors? Do you want them to be able to lock those, or leave them unlocked? I leave it on my server, but if you don't want people locking those garages, turn this off. It will save your players the heartache of walking up to a garage where they think they're going to get maybe a vehicle, or maybe some materials or loot or something like that. Hell, they could probably even get an electric or gas stove, and it's locked. If you want this on, it just means they can lock it. If you want it off, it means they can't lock it. Anyway, next. Cargo drop. Again, fairly straightforward. Cargo drop, cooldown, minimum time. Right? Minimum amount of time in minutes to pass between cargo drop events. So this is the minimum number, and this is the maximum number. So anywhere between 15 and 30 minutes, a cargo drop will spawn. This is the fall delay. this is in seconds. So when they see the notification in the top right of their corner, or top right of their screen, this is the duration between that notification and the cargo drop actually showing up in the game world. So when they see that announcement, they have a minute to prepare to get into their cars or maybe get the lockpicking items ready to go, and then it will spawn in the world. The fall duration, again in seconds, it takes 30 seconds from going from the very tip top of the map to landing on the map. So it takes 30 seconds. You can set this to a minimum of 1 for a maximum value of 600 seconds. Cargo drop self-destruction time. This is in seconds. You can set a maximum value of 3600 seconds or 1 second. I wouldn't set it to 1 second because that's totally pointless. I would set this between 300, 600, 900 seconds. That's probably kind of where you want to have them, because you don't want them still in the map and they've got nothing in them. You want them so players can get to them, get the stuff out, and then they vanish from the map. They explode, essentially. So, next, hunting. Okay, so max allowed hunts. I set this to the maximum number because you want to hunt as much as possible. Albeit a lot of people don't like the hunting in this game, because the way that this system used to work was you would, similar in style to the random encounters with the puppets in the overworld, running through forests and trees and fields and stuff like that. Sometimes you would randomly encounter a deer, a boar, a goat. I think we used to encounter crows and seagulls. We used to encounter, what else is it? Wolves, bears. There's a few other animals in there. But I set this to the maximum amount. You can set it to whatever amount you want. So I would maybe, if it was a multiplayer server with 64 slots, I would probably set it to 32, so half the population can go hunting. Or you could set it to 64, like everybody can go hunting. Hunt failure time. So time to find the next hunting clue before the hunt fails. I set this to the maximum value because I want as much time as possible to find the next clue. Hunt failure distance. This is how essentially the minimum distance to animals that players need to have for the hunt to still be considered valid. This is in meters. You can set this to a maximum of 22,000 meters or 22 kilometers or 300 meters. I've set mine to 8,000 meters because that's a nice little radius or a nice little kind of bubble for you to actually go about finding the next clue. The next lot of settings are essentially health multipliers. These are quite easy to understand. You don't need me to tell you what these are. Just to set the bear's max health, the boars, the chickens, the deer, the donkey, the goat, the horse, the rabbit, the wolf. You can set these as you want. You can make them indestructible or you can make them weaker. I leave them as default, which is 1. And we're back to bunkers. Let's move on to respawn. Allow sector respawn. Are you going to allow your players to spawn in all the sectors, or have they got the only option of a random chance to spawn or at their shelter? Allow shelter respawn. Will you allow them to respawn at their base on their bed? Again, totally up to yourself. Next things are quite important. Random spawn price, sector spawn price, shelter spawn price. Now, these are in relation to the currency in the game, so just the cash essentially. However, if you want these to cost gold, you must place the letter G after the numbers, okay? So a shelter respawn for me costs 1 gold. A respawn in the sectors costs 500 currency, and a random costs 100, okay? Random respawn initial time. Initial time in seconds for the random respawn to become available. This is essentially that little white bar that fills up around the selection or the option on the screen when you die. I set these all to 0 because I just want a quick selection. However, if you're running a multiplayer server and it's PvP, maybe you want the random initial time to be 5 seconds, maybe you want the sector respawn to maybe 10 seconds, and maybe you want the shelter respawn to maybe be 30 seconds because obviously they've been killed by another player, it takes them 30 seconds to wait to respawn back at their shelter. Okay, random respawn cooldown. The cooldown duration of random respawn, the random respawn option. I set these to 0 because I don't want a cooldown. I generally don't want cooldowns. You can set cooldowns for your multiplayer server if you want. These will be this is essentially a way to affect the players who die to puppets, animals, and other players, of course. Random cooldown reset multiplier. This is in relation to the cooldown here. I set these to 0 because I want the option immediately. I want it available essentially as soon as I die. I want it there and then. You can set these multipliers however you wish. Commit suicide initial time takes 0 seconds. Sometimes I've noticed that a couple of servers have set it to maybe like 30 seconds. It takes 30 seconds for your character to actually commit suicide. So that's that time. Commit suicide cooldown. Obviously you can only do this every 30 seconds. So if I was to commit suicide in the game, it would then take 30 more seconds for me to wait in order to do it again. Commit suicide cooldown reset multiplier. This is in relation to this cooldown right here. So set this as you want. Permadeath threshold. This is in relation to the negative amount of money that you will get in your bank each time you die. I've set mine to minus 9,999. You can obviously set it to minus 1 million or 10 million, or the maximum value of, I'm not even going to read that number, someone else can in the comments can figure that out for me. But this is essentially the permadeath. This is essentially the number it takes for you to have to create a completely new character in the server. Next is the vehicles. We're going to start with the resources, the fuel drain, the battery drain, and we've obviously got the multipliers that go with the inactivity, the alternator and the dynamo. I set these to 1 because that's the default. I don't mess around with the vehicle resources that much. Some servers set these to like 0, some set it to 0.5. I leave it at 1 because the default amount is it's so easy to work with. It's really easy to work with. But if you want to make it harder for your players, obviously increase this number. If you want to make it easier, drop it. Next, we're going to go to spawning. This is the in-game spawning of vehicles essentially. So the maximum amount of airplanes that are available in this game world is 128. Airplane functional amount is 128 also. Airplane minimum purchased amount, and I'm not going to go over all of these, I'm just going to go over this top one here because this also applies to every single option within here. So this is the amount that you can have in the game world, this number right here. This is the number that you will find in the game world. It's not actually the number you'll find in the game world because there's not 128 planes. What you'll find is planes will spawn more often when they're taken from their spawn points, so you'll have more players picking up planes that move off of their respawn points. Those respawn points being Delta 4 and Bravo 2 airfields. Okay. Airplane minimum purchased amount. This is the amount that you can buy at the trader. If you don't want the functional amount to be a lot, if you don't want them to find them in the game world, but you want them to purchase them, this is the kind of setting you want to have. 0 to full essentially. Or if you want it to be 50-50, you can have it as 50-50. For me, I have it as such. Now you can do this with the dirt bike, the Leica, the motorboat, the wheelbarrow, the Volkswagen, the bicycle, the Rager, the RIS or aka the quad bike, and the stand-up paddleboard. You can do that for all of these, so just set them as you will. Miscellaneous, maximum time of vehicle inactivity. This is essentially the time before a vehicle despawns. So I've set mine to 2400 hours. Okay, you can set this to maybe, I don't know, 12 hours, 24 hours, 48 hours, inactivity over 2 days, 4 days, 5 days, 6 days, etc. Set it as you will. Okay, so if you have a player who has a vehicle and they've not logged in for like maybe 2 weeks, they'll log back in and their vehicle's gone because the inactivity has been 7 days. You can calculate the amount of hours that you need to put into here to get 7 days. Log destroyed vehicles, again for multiplayer server owners who want to essentially find out what vehicles have been destroyed on the map and where and how. Okay? We're also back to resources, so we're kind of done with vehicles now. On to damage. So this is quite self-explanatory as well. Sentry damage multiplier is 2, so I've got it set 1 above its base rate, which is 1. Sentry railgun, now this is basically like essentially breaking the sentries down into their basic weaponry. So the railgun damage multiplier, I've set it to 1 because it's already got a global damage multiplier of 2, so this actually applies to this as well. So if you want to make this even deadlier, you can set this to 2, 1.5, or even higher if you really want to. Sentry grenade damage, again 1, it's already got a damage multiplier of 2, so I shouldn't have to worry about that one. Base building attacker sentry, this is a sentry that spawns on your base in the dropship encounter. I set it to 1 because if, again, this setting doesn't relate to this setting, by the way. This is completely separated from this one. Okay, so base building attacker sentry damage multiplier, I've set it to 1 because it's already an indestructible force of nature, so I leave it as it is. Again, railgun multiplier, grenade multiplier, you can set these, you can set this to 2 and these will essentially feed in from this one, but if you want to make them even tougher, you can set this to a higher number. Sentry base building damage multiplier, this is the damage it does to your base. Dropship damage multiplier, this is the damage that the dropship does to you. The dropship railgun damage multiplier, again this is its primary weapon, you can make it even deadlier or weaker. Dropship building elements damage multiplier, this is the damage that each individual element will take, so I've set it to just 1 because it's already an indestructible force, so. Zombie damage multiplier, that should read puppet because they're not zombies, they're puppets. So zombie damage multiplier is set to 4 for me, you can set this to 10 if you hate yourself, or you can set it to maybe 1, which is the default, or you can maybe set it to 0 where they do absolutely no damage. But for me, I like to set it to 4 because that's maybe 3 to 4 hits and your character dies. Item decay damage multiplier, the multiplier that modifies the damage that items receive over time. I've set this to 0.5, so all of my items decay 50% slower, essentially. Food decay damage multiplier, this is my food, this is the decay rate for it, and it's set to default. Now that we're done with damage, let's go on to features. Base building! If you have base building enabled, set the maximum amount of elements per flag. Okay, so this is the amount of elements per flag that each flag can essentially hold, each player can essentially meet. So I've set mine to 1000. Maximum number of expanded elements per flag is 50, so that's 1000 plus 50. Allow multiple flags per player. Do you want players to have more than one flag, more than one base, or do you want them to only have one base? Again, for multiplayer servers only, you don't really have to worry about this in single player. Allow flag placement on base building elements. Essentially, if you build a flag off with the thing that you're building, and then you build the elements up, destroy the flag, and then build the flag on the placed elements, it's now going to be completely encased. Your flag is essentially going to be encased within your building. It's going to be protected. What I like to do is I like to put my flag in the middle and build my base around my flag, but maybe you don't want to do that. Maybe you want to have it so it's actually sat on a wooden foundation or a stone foundation or a metal foundation. It's totally up to yourself. Chest acquisition duration, time that needs to pass for another squad. Hold on a minute, I've never seen this setting before. Time in hours that needs to pass after another squad put a chest in your flag area after you've logged inside your flag area. Oh, okay. That makes more sense. So it's the time that needs to pass after another squad has put a chest in your flag area. So if a squad places a chest in your flag area after you've logged in inside your flag area, that's the time it takes for you to acquire it, essentially. I think that's what that is. That's completely thrown me off. If you know what this setting is, please mention it in the comments, because this is the first time I'm seeing this this setting here. So in the comments, if you know what this setting is, please help other players out and put it in the comments below. Next, we're going to go on to raid protection. Do you want this on or off? In single player, you don't have to worry about raids. In multiplayer, you do. If you turn this on, then you've got raid protection on or off. It's totally up to yourself. Resources. Okay. This is the respawn of gasoline, water, and propane. So this is the water from, for example, wells, the gasoline from petrol stations, and the propane also located at petrol stations as well as the airfields in, if my mind serves me correct, Alpha 3 or Alpha 4 and Zulu 0, if I'm remembering that correctly. There's two airfields where you can't find planes, but you can land and refuel your plane if you have one. You can also do that there. But I set these to 1 because I work with defaults. I really do work with defaults. But if you want to tinker with this, if you want to make the maximum multiplier higher, then you're making it easier for players to gain water out of their well. Periodic replenish amount multiplier. Obviously, the higher this is, the easier it is. Replenish interval multiplier. The lower this is, the higher. Is this the lower it is? Multiplier for the interval in which the periodic replenishment container is replenished. So the lesser this is, the better. The easier it is. The more this is, the harder it is, or the longer you have to wait. Water proximity replenishment multiplier. Multiplier for the amount that is replenished in proximity replenishment containers. So this is in relation to the wells and water towers. So if there is a player within their proximity, they will start to replenish water. You can obviously increase this to make it easier, or decrease this to make it harder. Make it so they have to be closer to the well in order for it to replenish. Water proximity replenish chance. This is obviously the chance multiplier that the replenished containers will be refilled. So the higher this is, the faster the wells will be replenished. The lower it is, the harder or longer you have to wait. Water proximity replenish timeout multiplier. Multiplier of time between each check for proximity. So this is basically the world or the server checking that there is a player near a water source, and then if there isn't, it'll time it out. So the higher this setting, the longer the check is. The smaller this is, this setting is, the harder it is. And this also works in relation to the propane and gasoline, with the exception of the gasoline price unit multiplier, as well as the propane price multiplier. Because collecting from wells and water sources is free. However, you have to pay essentially in-game cash for gasoline and propane. So you can set the lower this is, or you can set it to 0. You can literally set it to 0. I set it to 1 because that's default. But the higher this is, the more money it's going to cost to get gasoline out of the petrol stations, or gas out of the gas station, or propane out of the propane tanks. The lesser this is, the cheaper it'll be. And there doesn't seem to be anything else in relation to that in here, so I'm going to move on to item spawning. So this is the probability spawner probability multiplier. Multiplier that modifies the probability of spawning items by spawner. What this is essentially saying is items that appear outside of containers. Okay? So this is items that appear outside of containers. Examine spawner examine spawner probability multiplier. Multiplier that modifies the probability of spawning examine items by spawner. So this is obviously examining something or looking inside a container, a crate, a locked container, that kind of thing. Examine spawner expiration time. Multiplier that modifies examine spawner expiration time. So this is essentially how long it needs to expire to essentially reset. Spawner expiration time multiplier. Multiplier that modifies the spawner expiration time. That word is so weird to me, I don't know why. Again, I'll leave these at 2. You can leave these at 1, which is the default, but I leave them at 2. Enable item cooldown groups. Enable, disable cooldown groups. Again, this is the first time I'm seeing that setting. I've not really utilised this setting on my multiplayer server. However, if you want to essentially enable the item cooldown groups, you can do that. You can turn that on. You can turn it off. Item cooldown groups duration, if this is off, this is obviously greyed out, but if you turn this on, you can set the multiplier. I'll leave it off. Saves time. Farming. Okay, this is quite easy. Plant harvest examine time multiplier modifies the plant's examine spawner expiration time, so I've set that to 10. First plant harvest additional chance is 100%, percentage that modifies the chance for produce to spawn on the first harvest. I've set that to 100% because I'm growing something. I want to be able to actually get something back from my growing, you know what I mean? You can set this to any percentage that you want. You can set it to 50%, 75%, it's totally up to yourself. Skills, this is skill multipliers. Okay, so this is where the fun begins. This is really where the fun begins for your players. If you have a server that has all of these set to 1, they are going to be leveling up very slowly. However, the higher these are, the easier it will be for those players to gain archery skill, aviation skill, awareness skill, brawling, camouflage, cooking, demolition, driving skill, endurance skill, engineering, farming, handgun ability, medical skills, weapons via melee, motorcycle skill, rifles, running, basically every skill that you can think of in this game. This is the multipliers for them, and you can see how I've set them up. I've kind of set them to like essentially 3 times the amount. Okay, miscellaneous. Body simulation speed multiplier. This is your metabolism. 3.84 is the default. You can set this to a lower percentage so the metabolism takes longer, or you can set it to a higher number where the metabolism goes faster. Maintain items expiration time. So I've set this in hours to 360, and I believe that is... I'm not even going to try doing that in my head. It's essentially, I believe this is 7 days or 14 days. I think the default's 14 days. Yeah, I think the default is 14 days. Killbox defuse failure bonus. Amount of extra time in seconds you get for each failed killbox defuse. So you get 1.5 seconds extra for a failed killbox defuse. But you can set this to higher if you really want. You want to give them an extra 5 seconds? You can give them an extra 5 seconds. I'll give myself an extra 1.5. Enable BCU locking. This is for multiplayer servers. BCU locking is essentially to BCU lock chests, doors and stuff like that. So if you are in a squad, you can BCU lock so no one else from your squad can essentially take from your containers or go through doors that you don't want them to go through. You can turn this on or you can turn it off. Enable new player protection. New player protection is a new thing that has been introduced to the game where essentially your character will be spawning in an area that's close to POIs and close to loot, and also spawning in an area that's maybe not full of players. It's essentially the game determining where all the players are and where all the loot is, or where a good location for a new player is probably best to spawn at. You can turn this on or you can turn this off. New player protection duration. This is in minutes. So you have 120 minutes, so this is 2 hours. 2 hours total of new player protection. If you die within those 2 hours, you are still going to be spawned close to like POIs, places you can loot, things that you can actually do in the game. Basically, you're going to be spawning in the better locations until 2 hours is up, at which point it will spawn you in random locations if you select random to respawn on. Allow automatic parachute opening. Now, when you are falling, if you have the ability to parachute into the game via spawn, this essentially sets it up so if you're away from your computer or if you're alt-tabbed or something like that and you respawn, you don't have to worry about pressing F to deploy your parachute. I leave this off because I want to deploy the parachute when I want to deploy it. But you can turn this on if you really want to allow your players essentially peace of mind if you want to. Okay, this is a funny one. Hide the quick access bar. The quick access bar is your hotbar from 1 to 9 or 0. You can hide this from your players so they don't see what's actually on their hotbar. They just have to remember what's assigned to 1, 2, 3, etc. They have to essentially see that. Hide life indicators. These are the indicators that you can see in the bottom left hand side of the screen. You can turn these on or you can turn them off. If this is set to off, they are turned on. If this is set to on, they are turned off. Okay? On means off, off means on. And we're back to base building. This takes us to custom zones. Now, as you can see, my custom zones, there are none. There are absolutely none. Outpost Z3, C2, B4 and A0, these are added by default. You'll have these 4 by default. I have deleted them because I don't want safe zones on my map in single player. However, what you can do is you can set 100 custom regions. So if you really wanted to, you could add a circle or add a rectangle. You can also remove a region from here. You can also set configurations. The configurations, you can set the zone color. So you've got green, light blue, that's a kind of almost like washed out purple, red, pink, orange, kind of tan color, skin color, or yellow. And you can set each individual thing right here. You can go through each individual thing here and essentially set up zones so they are unique. If you have fall damage, you ignore. This event is ignored by the zone and the next zone under it. So if you have 2 layers on top of each other, so let me just demonstrate. So if I have this zone, right, and I add another rectangle, right, and I set that to safe zone, if that safe zone has fall damage block, if I select on outpost, fall damage ignore, this area right here is essentially, well, this is on top of this one. So if you really wanted it to be the other way around, you go to custom region 1 and custom region 2 and set them by the layer. So in this area, fall damage is blocked. So from this point, like kind of here, it's ignored because the outpost on top of it, oh, that was the wrong thing I did there. So if I click on this one, it says fall damage, ignore what's underneath it, essentially. This layer right here, this little portion right here, this little rectangle is essentially ignored. So when you enter this zone, even though this zone overlaps this zone, like that, it ignores the parameters set by the blue zone. So the green zone takes, prevalence essentially. But you can see that you can essentially chop and change a lot of different things here. Puppet damage, suicide puppet damage, sentry damage, animal damage, base defense damage, vehicle damage, brawling damage, melee weapon damage, throwing explosive trap, burn damage, damage to bases, that's player bases, damage to vehicles, player vehicles, EMP effect. Do you want the EMP effect to actually affect vehicles and players and stuff like that? Picking player locks. If you want a PvE only map, you can set this to essentially block them from picking player locks. and you can also block them from picking world locks if you have them unlocked. You don't have to worry about that. Building bases, so that's the blueprint or the modular building system. Do you want them to have the ability to build in that certain area? Flag overtake, this is a kind of PvP feature. Do you want them to be able to overtake a flag? Vehicle parking is basically leaving your vehicle in a safe zone or a zone that is designated as safe. You want them to have the ability to do that, or do you not want them to have the ability to do that? Availability grid, you can block that. Chest parking, you can block that too. So I took off there, 2 seconds. Chest parking is essentially leaving a chest in a safe zone and coming back to it so no one can touch it. You can block that. But hopefully this has helped you, ladies and gentlemen. As I said, with NPCs, I'm going to make a dedicated video to this because, as I said, this is a lot of information right here. This right here is quite a lot of information. Fair enough, it is a very important factor because it's the max allowed, like the kind of puppets that spawn in your world. All I can say is the base character amount multiplier, you can only go up to a maximum of 3 on this. As you can see, if you type in 4, it goes red. You cannot apply that. You can only go up to a maximum of 3, and I think a minimum of 0.1. Yeah, 0.1 is the minimum and 3 is the maximum. I set mine to 2.0. But, ladies and gentlemen, that has been server settings for Scum. Hopefully this has helped you out. Hopefully you can get your servers all set up. Hopefully you can get your single players saves all set up as well. If you need any assistance, leave a comment on this video. I'll try and answer them as best as I can. For anyone who's going to ask about trader file config, this is not included in this video. That is another video I'm going to hopefully do fairly soon because there is a lot to cover in that as well. There's a lot of details in that it's probably best doing it over 2 or 3 videos. If I'm going to be honest, there's quite a lot of detail in it. But this has been today's server setting walkthrough, ladies and gentlemen, with the exception of the NPC setting. I hope this has helped you. If it has, leave a thumbs up, tell me what you think in the comments below. If you've got any questions, leave them in the comments as well. Want to stay around for more videos like this, more tutorials, more help guides, consider subscribing, ring the little bell and select all. You will be notified with the next video uploaded very soon. That as well, we also do our Sunday night live stream. It starts between 6 and 7 PM UK. We go for about 3-4 hours playing Scum and a variety of other games. Thank you very much for watching today, ladies and gentlemen. As I said, if you need any assistance, leave a comment below. I really do hope this helped you, and I do apologise if I missed anything or misinterpreted anything. Anyone who can help me or provide any assistance, please leave a comment down below, and I will try and get as many people to check it out as possible. Thank you again. I've been Mr. Feudal. I'll see you all another time. Want to support the channel like these awesome people on the left? Consider joining. Also, consider subscribing if you want to see more videos just like this. Thank you again for watching this video, ladies and gentlemen. As always, I've been Mr. Feudal. I'll see you all another time.